just preparing to live stream. Give me 2 secs. This meeting is being live streamed, and hopefully it'll just come up on. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Right, that's it. We are live. That's it. Live. Right, here we go. Right. Thank you so much, Nathan. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with me. I'll just give an intro because this is going live on my social media, and over the years I've accrued quite a following, and I've been interviewing victims and survivors of childhood abuse. I'm a former police detective in London, and I sort of gained a name for myself in my role in whistleblowing and speaking out about the deliberate cover-up of child abuse. In doing so, the system went against me to shut me up. I continued to speak out, but I went around once I left the police, and I started giving platform to survivors. And then something which started to happen was I started to speak to survivors of what wasn't really known in the UK, but something called SRA, satanic ritual abuse. And I believe you are a survivor yourself. And can you just give a little bio, a little brief entry about yourself so people over here can fully appreciate you?
You betcha. Yeah, I come from a family of people that were practitioners of this sadistic, ritualistic abuse of children and child exploitation rings. And so I grew up in that family and have come out against it over the past few years, and trying to empower people with an understanding of not only the mechanics of how radical intelligent evil manipulates and facilitates this cover-up and this secrecy that's taken place across our society, but also how we ourselves can get set free and restored out of those systems of bondage that we've all kind of been enslaved by and to.
Yeah, amen. And like myself, you know, you're a soldier for Jesus, and it's difficult for some people that I interact with, because when they endured the abuse, what was done to them was a form of mind control, and it would install a fear that they would never ever go towards any sort of Christianity, because they would invert, you know, the preachings of Jesus. You know, I've heard of people that have been abused, and a little baby lamb's been cut open over them, or so were being abused, and told that that's the Lamb of God. Prayers from the Bible would be read out to them, and it, you know, many survivors of religious institutions such as a Catholic Church and a Protestant church, and a lot of the survivors I speak to, especially the ones that come from abuse within the middle classes, the satanic ritual abuse in the middle classes in England, very much sort of people that are held in high esteem within our society. A lot of them were so-called active Christians. Would attend church, you know, on the outside, were decent members of society, but, you know, at night, a total different story would go on. So
that's much how my family operated as well, was under a similar guise or ruse.
So can we sort of go for a bit of a timeline of yourself and what you endured to a degree, whatever you're comfortable talking about?
Sure.
And you know, and how, you know, you're an author, and your book is Snatched from the Flames, and, you know, we can promote your work, your book, and how, you know, you were snatched from the flames. What does that actually mean? So over to you, Nathan.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for giving me an opportunity to come and share with you and those who are listening today. But
pleasure.
For reference of an understanding, my family, like John was referencing earlier, was not an overtly evil looking family, but rather they kind of, many of the individuals who have a lot of power or influence in our society today have kind of gone with a very different approach than being publicly, you know, wanted or being publicly desired as the bastions and the leaders of our society. Rather, they've hidden themselves under layers of anonymity, and they believe that the most powerful position to be in is one within secrecy, one within invisibility. And so my family comes from a very wealthy empire from the Eastern United States, and came out to the Western half of the United States to try to start their own. And my father and grandfather basically took a tact of using and exploiting their children in order to kind of build an empire through blackmail and exploitation. So as a young child, I was raised up and given over to my family members, specifically my grandfather, who operated in the city called Lake Havasu City, Arizona. And what he would do was, as a member of the Knights of Columbus, he was a finder for that program who would recruit other individuals into another layer to that fraternal organization of the Roman Catholic Church that would exploit children under the guise of blackmail and or advancements of degrees, advancements of ranking within that system. It would open up for them doors of opportunity in other areas of their life if they were willing to compromise themselves through the exploitations and the specific abuse of children or their own family members. And so as a young boy, grew up being passed through this family hands where I was molested and abused and raped and utilized as a prostitute for these men in these orders. And it damaged and corrupted my mind and my understandings of sexuality, my understandings of truth and of righteousness and of what is corruption and what is normal, to where incestuous abuse to me became normalized and became part of the family's business. And so at the same time that this was taking place in my life, and as I grew up, my family, though, did not advocate a Roman Catholic Church loyalty on the outside, but rather my dad and my family participated in infiltrating the ranks of Christianity and non-denominational Christianity and more charismatic movements. And so they would kind of hide in plain sight inside the church. And it would give them the ability to persevere and amidst this systems of chaos that were taking place in my life. So I was living this corrupted, constant, duplicitous lifestyle with radical intelligent evil and ritualistic abuse, and then being shoved in Christian schools and shoved in Christian churches and being shown this kind of weak version of Christianity, this weak Jesus, and being shown power comes from darkness. Power comes from willingness to do whatever it takes to accomplish your goals. And so I was stuck in that wedge for many years of my life. And I believed violence and I believed vengeance was the way out. And so I began to pursue freedom through the edge of a knife and freedom through this militant revenge program that I was placed into and brought into to be able to eliminate who I thought were the bad guys. If I could just fight back, if I could just kill the pedophiles, I could be free. But it was another massive lie that left me bloodstained and riddled with despair at the end of it.
And what age did you actually break free from it?
You know, I wouldn't say that there was there were times in my life where I thought I was free of it. Like when I was a freshman in college and I had gotten out of the United States military and believed I could be free of it. And I tried to just bury it all behind John. I thought freedom would come from burying up and covering up the secrets and covering up the bloodshed of my past. And it leached out of me and I couldn't escape this madness in my mind. I set myself against it wholeheartedly was after I got married to a woman who did not know about this side of me, did not know about this past of mine. And when we found out we were going to have a child together, that was my moment where I had to set myself completely apart from that family and come out instead against it, because the price for patronizing the family, you know, in inheritance really is the access to your child. They want you to give them access to your child for a certain set of days out of every year so that they can traumatize them and abuse them and turn them into basically their pet project. And I was not willing to do that. And so that was when I came out wholeheartedly. I was 27 years old when that real juncture came to fruition in my life.
There seems to be a clear definition between the survivors that I speak to that have been abused in institutions and within the domestic environment, and those that have been abused within the satanic environment. You know, we got this one condition called DID, dissociated identity disorder, in which the mind is fractured into many splintered alters, as they call it. But also there is this contractual element to it. And what I've been finding is that child pornography is very much connected to satanic ritual abuse. And it's like the children are the property of the cult. And it is the duty of the parents of these children to utilize these children for their perversion, but also for money-making schemes such as pornography and bribery. Would that be the case in your experience?
Yes. I mean, my family were what you would say are Luciferians, people that were illuminists, that believed the tenets of the Jesuit orders and their edicts, which is a militant approach to counter-reformation, to the best way to counter this massive reformation that was taking place after Martin Luther, was that we needed to raise up a militant pseudo-scientific religious order, an intelligence network that could counter those strategies and infect the world with its agents who were loyal to the papacy and loyal to the Black Pope, the superior general of the Jesuits, who were willing to advance that kingdom of destruction under the ruse of building up society and enlightening it with this new age of reason. And so my family members would use the individuals that were participants in this network in order to compromise other individuals, other key players of society or business and entertainment and the religious and educational systems, so that they could manipulate them going forward. They did that by creating, like you talked about, what is more or less a mind-controlled slave, someone who was loyal to their abusers, because you cannot successfully maintain secrecy amidst an abusive environment when that person has the desire to get set free and is willing to talk about what they've been through. So the way that they do that is they start generally before the age of 7 years old, predominantly between 3 and 6 years old, systemically traumatizing the child to cause, like you said, dissociation, this fracturing and splintering of the mind, which can be as basic as somebody who's driving down the road who kind of zones out and you suddenly realize you're back at home again and you don't really remember portions of the drive. That's kind of a basic level of dissociation, all the way to a more extreme version, which is when people are going through life and death situations where they're watching physical abuse happen to somebody else that they know, or they're being physically abused to such an extent that their mind looks for an escape. And that we call that dissociation, or this floating away. Often it's synonymous with this butterfly effect and this kind of splintering of the mind. And that new, fresh, clean slate, blank slate of a personality is then programmed to be loyal to the one who maybe comes into the room and makes it stop, the one who rises up out of that moment and puts an end to it and seemingly rescues that child out of that abusive situation and becomes bonded to that child. And this is a physiological, psychological, and spiritual bond that takes place between this aspect of a personality, an alter, or like a little portion of the soul that becomes bonded and loyal to the cult or loyal to the handlers, who then utilize that person to continue to perpetuate their agenda, right? This is the definition of really coercion. And this is how it takes place here in the United States. It's being exposed on a much more rampant scale than perhaps over there, like what you're doing, John, with Great Britain and the kind of older religion that's taken place over there. Maybe the more secreted away and established control mechanisms have kept it sealed up a little tighter than over here in the United States, where people have been coming out against it for a little bit longer. But the fruit of those kingdoms are inseparable. In even the Lake Havasu City, Arizona, where much of this abuse was taking place, this has got the Lord Mayor of London's laying the cornerstone of the London Bridge.
The bridge, I heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's literally where this epicenter of that abuse was taking place in my life. And you have Sir Gilbert Inglefield from the Lord Mayor of London in the 1960s, who laid that cornerstone and intimately tied this financial control arm of the Red Dragon in with the United States military and religious order here with the Jesuits and the Knights of Columbus. And it was this epicenter that they designed using a gentleman named C.V. Wood, a partner of Walt Disney, who would build these theme parks for Walt Disney, and these entertainment individuals who were using Stanford research groups and who are practicing out this mind-controlled experimentation on society as a whole scale. So they created a whole city to facilitate this called Lake Havasu City, Arizona, where they created a retirement community where people could come in and have lots of plausible deniability as to why there were so many older men with so many young children and young boys specifically in this town during all these different times of the year. And so that city came out of this desire to traffic and exploit children and compromise individuals and create a network, a hub in the western portion of the United States for Las Vegas and Los Angeles and Phoenix to distribute out this networks of human intelligence and human resources that they were infecting the society with.
Well, see, the UK, we've got ancient lands. You know, we've got a school which has provided more prime ministers than any others, and we call them public schools, but they're fee-paying schools. The only reason they're called public is because members of the public, by decree of the Public Schools Act, were allowed to have access to go there. But these are elite schools, and one of them, they even sing a song called Jerusalem. It's called Eton. That's where near enough every prime minister in the UK has gone to. And these kids are brought up on what is, it's been researched, and it's a Greco-Roman gladiatorial school type environment where the kids are divested from their parents, put in there at the ages, very infant ages, and they're given a diet of whippings, beatings with canes and buggery. And they've got a system called the fagging system, where the older boys have got the governance of the younger boys, and it's a very sexualized environment. And I've been told by an ex-member whose father was a member of Winston Churchill's cabinet that, you know, the fagging system in Eton is nothing more than a rent boy racket. So we've got the same thing with our leaders that have gone through this version of mind control, you know, where there has been no matriarchal love. It's just they are made to worship and adorn the system, you know. That, and even when I was a police officer and I worked in Vice as a detective, and when we would raid brothels, I can always remember raiding a very upmarket brothel in the very wealthy Mayfair region of London. And we come across when we used to just run in and just kick the doors open. And we caught this very well-to-do guy who was had something to do with the Chamber of Commerce for the government. And he was being bent over and he was being thrashed with a cane by a prostitute. And he was paying for it. Now, I was talking to a criminal profiler about this. You know, what is it with these upper echelons of British society when they've got this obsession with being caned? And he said, well, what they're doing is they're trying to take control of a childish situation in which they had no control. So where they were bent over, their trousers pulled down and they were caned, and then sometimes they were buggered, they reconstruct it, but this time they're in control, you know. But so what you're dealing with is emotionally broken men, which have got the emotional capacity of a child. You know, and then they are put in charge. You know, they go on about child soldiers and how dangerous they are in the theatre of war, because they have no emotion and they have the ability to run it blindly into these situations and shoot anything that moves. But we have the same with these leaders. They have got the same mentality as a child soldier. Something you mentioned, Nathan, which is repeated with the survivors of satanic abuse, and this is the hero that appears. I hear a lot more in this form of sexual abuse, of the role that women play in it, than I do in institutional abuse, where the men that are in charge of schools or the priests would come in and abuse children. But with the satanic, the mother in the UK seems to have a strong role. But the mother is used, and she will appear when the child, to take the child out of this environment. But she put the child in that environment in the first place by trafficking the kid there and giving it to abusers, who would then torture, rape them, and then the mother would appear as the hero to take the child away. And the mother then becomes the handler, because they would associate the mother as being, you know, the savior. But in effect, it's a bit like, you know, the Wicked Witch. You know, it's just a facade, and it is entrenched in evil. Something I'd like to ask you, Nathan, about these people, because what they are doing, they are in fact worshipping the devil in what they do. They might veil it in some sort of positive religious, you know, environment, but it's a lie, because the language of the devil is a lie. But what I found when I've come across certain individuals that try and take me away from what I'm doing, and that is exposing this underbelly of filth, is that they hate the presence or even the mention of Jesus Christ. It seems to have a negative reaction in them. They don't like it. They don't like to tolerate these very strong, committed Christian environments. And I mean proper committed Christians, people that generally want to go out there in the name of Jesus and protect kids. These people that, and your family that did this to you, would they ever manifest in any way that you noticed?
You know, it's a really good question, because the version like you're describing with kind of those elite the elite public school, like you said, we have a very similar version here in the United States that churns out our presidents and our cabinet members and the senators and congressmen, and these elite private boarding schools. And just a handful of them turn out almost all of that kind of upper echelon. And like you said, they're given a completely different experiential system of experiences that they go through, but also an educational system that makes them convinced that they indeed have this divine right to rule, that they are the favored race, they are the chosen ones, you know. And my family members had a similar aptitude for believing that we had in our bloodline this serpentine godhood in us that gave us the authority to rule over the masses. And so that physical manifestations, like you're asking about, at the mention of Jesus or the mention of the authority of the King of Kings, that from my family was not present. However, when I started to contend against it directly, when I started coming out and basically getting into verbal wrestling matches with my family about how I was finding deliverance and restoration and healing through forgiveness, through literally setting myself apart from that system, when I began to walk in a set apart way and really look at the scriptures as an authoritative, reliable, historical text that I could bet my life on, and when I began to turn to that and do what the scripture said, then I saw this manifestation, this change in that mask, because you're dealing with a spiritual power of embodiment of a body by a parasite, by a spiritual parasite that feeds on the anguish and the torment and the emotional manipulation of the people that are around it. And so my family had been practitioners of this two-faced dualism throughout most of their life, and were very, very good at it. But the mask slipped off very intentionally when I really had these showdowns with them, contending against the spiritual powers that were embodying this demonic spirits, these generational serpentine spirits that these people had been possessed by during these rituals. They drink in the flames of darkness, and they were ruled by it. And that spiritual power, like the last conversation I had with my dad, that mask slipped off and he was screaming and cussing in the little children's playground at the top of his lungs. And he's never done anything like that. My wife was there and witnessed it. She's never even seen him say a harsh word, but he was vile and demonically possessed on a whole other level, and ran away screaming out of the park. And that's because there's a reality to it, an authority.
But I was going to say, is
creation that you cannot disrupt the order of who is the King of Kings and who has to submit to his authority. And all these spiritual powers have to submit to him. Every knee will bow before him. Every tongue will confess that Yeshua is the Messiah, to the glory of the Father forever. And so those spiritual powers understand they cannot exceed an authority that's higher than the one that they are governing under. So if they are operating under the authority of Lucifer or this Illumin one or the dragon, they have an appeal for their chain of command of which they can operate and manipulate underneath them. But when they run into an authority that is higher than them, they cannot contend against that. And so that's when you'll see these manifestations where this breakdown in programming and physical ability to constrain themselves slips away, because the spirits that are behind it are losing their plug. They're getting disconnected from the power source that was allowing them the ability to dominate and control.
This is exactly what I experienced. I didn't realize the journey what I was on and the authority that I was to undertake. But someone that came into my life, she knew the path I was on. And I have no doubt that she was there to take me away from it. And if you met her, very Middle England, very presentable, polite, never even swore, abhorred swearing. But one day I challenged her, and my word, I've never seen nothing like it. And it was like three amplified voices at once coming out. lying to me, convincing that my protection, the reason I'm still alive, came from her and following. And of course, when I challenged it for its name, I got this different name. And then I said, no, my protection comes from my Lord, my Savior Jesus. Well, that was like getting water and pouring it on hot oil. The reaction was just so obtuse and so vile. Nothing would ever prepare me for it. And this is what I saw, this breakdown, this unable to contain. That's why I asked you that question, to see if ever being in that environment, once you started taking authority, because we all have that authority. We just have to grab it and use it and cleanse ourselves and go into repentance and deliverance, and then we can move forward. But the other side doesn't like it. And you're right. It is all about authority. It's a legalized system. And as much as they're chaotic and they're underhanded and they're deceptors and liars, they still got to play the game. And they do play the game, but they're liars about it. You know, they're well, serpentine, exactly how they trap. Nathan, what I found, what you're describing is a very organized and very structured form of, negative belief, Satanism. I want to talk, if we may, about the other factions, because the United Kingdom is ex-colonial nation, and we get a lot of the ex-colonies come home to roost, to what they class as a motherland. So we've got a lot of people from the Caribbean, the Jamaica and these British territories, Trinidad, Tobago, these islands, huge communities, West Africa. And what we're seeing is the followings that are predominant in these countries. So there's Opia, OPEA, which is like Santeria. Voodoo amongst the West African communities is very, very rife. I mean, there's a country called Benin, which officially it's almost a third of the religion is voodoo. But what they do is they co-join. So a temple that's used for voodoo will also be used for Christian worship, and then they'll merge them. So there's hardly sometimes any difference between. And what I noticed is that the demonic structure that they follow is the same. There will be the Baal worship, the Leviathan worship, the Azazel, all these others, but given different names. You know, the same 9 demonic gods or whatever. I'm not too clued up with the whole demonology. However, I'm learning by the day. I'm learning by the day, but the structure is very much the same. You know, the same. For instance, Leviathan, you know, the serpent of the sea. The West Africans, they worship the Mami water. It's the same thing. The mermaids, and we see the symbolism in popular culture, and we see it in the commercial sense, you know, with the coffee industry and everything else, the music industry. These serpents and these demons, they're advertised, they're used in part of the logos.
It's nothing new under the sun, John. I mean, that is the spiritual powers that demand the worship. You know, and that's people's time, their money, their energy, their wills, their emotions are getting caught up in this kind of corporate merchants of death. But really, they have a spiritual power behind them, like the Starbucks here in our country, you know, the split-tailed mermaid. They've changed their logo now a little bit, so you can't tell, but these are this is a Sumerian goddess, this mermaid goddess, and that's one of the most powerful and influential companies in this world. You know, we have the same thing that's taken place here in the United States with really occult marketing, you know, where they're openly embracing that here in our country, that we're going to embrace this idea that, you know, it's kind of sexy and smart and fun to have devilish things in our life. You know, there's brands like the Jezebels, and you literally are seeing this, of course, revelation. But, you know, it's the enemy is going through his own revelation right now and revealing his beast system. But there is ultimately the greatest counter to it, which is the revelation of our Messiah. You know, and those scales are getting peeled off of people's eyes as they become more overt. But the family on my side were worshipers of the serpent, you know, and that comes from the Lord Mayor of London. That's that red dragon that is over that.
It's a logo.
It's not just their logo. Like, that's the spirit that empowers that kingdom. That is, I mean, we have massive insurance networks here in the United States. I mean, our financial networks are insurance companies that run this country in so many ways. They are financed out of that Red Dragon's empire.
Well,
That is controlling for this country as well.
A third of the world's economy goes through the City of London every single day. And what we got to look at is the City of London is its own jurisdiction.
Yes.
Now I've got a slight negative connection with the City of London, only because I pursued in court someone who's very high up in the City of London police. And I no doubt they got that position for the reason that they tried to prevent me doing what I was doing. So they look after themselves. However, when you look at its history, the Queen has no jurisdiction there. When I was whistleblowing and exposing what I was doing, I took my argument to Parliament, to the Houses of Parliament, and the minister, the member of Parliament for policing, he was actually a good guy. He'd been in a children's home himself, and he stood by me, and he was fearful that I would get killed. And one of the lines of inquiry we had was with the City of London. He said, John, I have no jurisdiction. I have jurisdiction over every single UK police force and territorial forces. So we would get the Cayman Islands come under the UK. We've got Gibraltar, which is in the tip of Spain, comes under it. And Britain's got these little British territories, the Falkland Islands in the South Atlantic, all over the world. We've got these mini Englands, They've all still got to answer to the Queen and to the members of Parliament that govern them. The City of London, their police do not swear an allegiance to the Queen. They've not got the crown. See, on the insignia of everything to do with the crown, it's called the King Edward's coronet. It's a crown, right? And it shows it's to do with the royal family or whatever. I can't go too deep into it because I don't know it that intensely. However, the insignia on the badge for the City of London Police, all the others is silver, there's is gold, and it's the griffin. So, and again, you're right, when you go in there, it's overlooked by two dragons, and the protectorates of the gates to the City of London are Gog and Magog.
That's right.
And it's steeped in ancient tradition and bizarre ceremonies. And you're right, it's I heard the same thing about the Lord Mayor of the city going over to sort of open up the rebuilding of the old London Bridge, which they moved stone by stone, didn't they, to the desert.
Right. And that's where we get the child rhyming song about the London Bridge falling down. And the reason that song is because they used to entomb people in those stones. They'd entomb their children into those stones to keep it from falling down. That was the belief that if we encapsulate the children inside that, if we sacrifice our children to it, we can keep the pillars of this foundation of this city, this empire up. And so it was always, from time immemorial, that's what London was known for. And their bridges in particular were known for, was that people were practicing child sacrifice, infanticide, in order to maintain that. And the United States has propagated themselves as in this kind of colonial approach just the same, but we utilize military bases as our own version of that, as embassies, and as our ambassadors, who are literally called Black Dragons. The ambassadors for the United States embassies are called Black Dragons. Like, that's how we export our own influence, or how the nation of America exports its own influence and over that. And when I got brought into the United States military to start doing special kill teams operations with them, you come into a totally different covenant when you swear these oaths of allegiance and you swear on this America, which you come to find out and learn America means the land of the plumed serpent. And this is what this land over here, this territory and empire, has always had, this spiritual power of Quetzalcoatl and these feathered serpents as the ones who were worshipped, who demanded human sacrifice as a means to maintain their empire. And that doctrine and ideology has infected this nation and had always been here. If you go and read Cortez's journals, if you go read the individuals who came over here and witnessed this, the letters from Mexico, you see this dragon worship, the serpent worship that was just ensconcing the entire nationscape. And it never went away. It just went underground. It just went underground until such a time as now, where it's becoming less and less apt for them to keep it concealed. In fact, they're trying to recruit people into it and try to make it something that's desirable. But I have a playlist on my channel called The Sword of the Covenant, which I go through breaking down how a lot of these oaths and these allegiances in America, and whether it's the American flag or our national anthem, how these fraternal organizations were the ones who came up with this, because they're pledging allegiance to another God, a different God that's on our money, that's on all of our coins, and all of our, every great seal in this state and this country has this other God that's over it. You know, you'll see this all-seeing eye, like on the state of Colorado. We have all of these gods and these deities, whether it's liberty or whether it's Columbia or whether it's ISIS. We have these deities that are the gods of this nation, which is why I really see America as this new land of Egypt, you know, that is governed like it. Whereas you see the old Roman gods that are still domineering over much of the world.
Well, it's funny you should say ISIS, because you're going on about the bridges, the River Thames. If you look at the old maps, it's called ISIS. The Thames actually called ISIS.
Wow.
So if you go to Oxford is a great university, which is on the Thames, and you look at a map, Thames is referred to as Isis, and it is a serpent that goes all the way through. So it's always been there. Yeah, it's very bizarre. It's go and look at a map, especially where the Thames goes to its source near Oxford. It's actually called Isis. So, you know, and it's no coincidence that we see Isis named all the time now. You know, the more they can get it reverberating.
That's right.
So, I served the crown, you know, in my job, and of course I took an allegiance and an oath, and then I realized that, you know, that they were doing anything but protecting children, and that conflicted with my inner conscience, and it was wrong. So something said, no, you're not having this, and I stood up, and they did everything to take me down, but thank God I'm still here and I can carry on doing my work. But yourself, you was in the military, you said that you know, you had blood on your hands. When you progressed through your life and you went to Jesus, how did you manage to sort of redeem yourself from having all that sort of life that you'd taken or whatever? I don't want you to sort of state anything you're not prepared to state, you know, and get yourself in any trouble. But how did that weigh on your conscience, and how did you alleviate that?
You know, when I was in it, John, the way it weighed on me constantly. You know, I had this survivor's guilt. At the end of the day, I couldn't die, and I wanted to so badly. For so much of my life, I was just obsessed with this desire to just be done. I had lived through enough suffering, than more than I can even start to articulate to people, because most humans lack the capacity to understand how radically intelligent evil can corrupt human beings to such an extent that they will perpetuate such systematic abuse of human beings to make them unrecognizable as people anymore, to make them the dead walking. And so when I got into the military, I was convinced that you could just slaughter your way to deliverance, that you could kill the pedophiles and the child exploiters and redeem this society from that scourge of evil. And I saw the corruption in the United States military, and people that were attachés to the State Department, and people who were working for the Defense Intelligence Agency who were corrupt. And I just saw this constant corruption everywhere I looked. And every time I thought I was entering into a new group or a new cell or a new industry that was going to be the ones who were the heroes, I continued to find, when I rooted into them, this darkness that was abiding inside them. And so I got to such an extent that I was convinced there was no way out. There was no way to get free from these people, that they were running everything, and I could never get free. And as I left the United States military and went into college, and I met my wife, and we have this child, and we start to realize that whatever I got to do, I've got to find a way to get out and to get free, no matter the cost, because I would rather die trying to protect my child than to give her over for a generational punch card to freedom. I wanted her to have life, authentic life, a vibrant, passionate life, the one that I never could have comprehended as an option when I was young. I wanted to give her the gift of choice, that she could choose what her life was, rather than being coerced and manipulated constantly. I wanted her to feel the freedom. And so for me and my wife, the option, the way to get out was to totally commit to another kingdom, to leave and forsake the oaths, to repent of the oaths that I'd sworn to that plumed serpent, to the kingdom of death, to the reaper, that I would repent and renounce those, and that I would commit to a covenant of a lifestyle of walking in my Father's instructions, to guarding his commandments, to walking in the deliverance and the hope of what is promised in the scriptures, and to set myself outside of that system and to have nothing to do with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather to expose and reprove them, to eagerly battle against them. And when I did that, I mean, all hell broke loose.
How did you do it, Nathan? How?
I did it by confronting them individually at the beginning, but then I realized that I thought my family, but honestly, John, I thought my family had stopped with me. You know, I was brought into the United States military in those groups because I was kind of engineered from a young age to infiltrate the military industrial complex and to basically be a plant inside there to exploit and advance the family's agenda for them. And when that came to a head and blew up, I thought they were done with me and that the family had failed in that project and they'd be done. Generally, each generation within like these governing families will have a chosen one out of, you know, if you have 3 children, if you have 4 or 5 children, you're going to pick one who is going to go through these fires. They call them the scorch trials, or other versions of the descent down into the abyss, or the ascension of Prometheus out of his bondage and back into the fire of enlightenment. They will pass these children through these fires throughout their lifetime. And then as they're able to go into those, whatever sector of society that they deem would be the best fit, they're supposed to be able to be successful in there. But if that generation fails, some family members are cut off and not able to kind of have another go at it. And so that's what I thought had happened with my family. But when I went back to them to try to warn them and show them, hey, forgiveness has brought me restoration. You guys, I forgive you for what you guys did to me. And I want you to find the freedom that I've had and that you guys can get out of this. Well, I had no idea about the generational longevity of their planning that had been taking place and was continuing to take place, and their willingness to corrupt another generation. And so there was an explosion of people coming down and trying to hunt down my wife and I, and trying to murder us and our unborn daughter at the time. And we got to see the Father intervene and jamming weapons and stopping vehicles and protecting us so that we didn't have to fight with our carnal hands, but we could see there was more power with the words that came out of our mouth and the convictions of our life and confidence in our Creator, convictions with faith, belief in our Messiah. And we began to contend eagerly against it and wage a spiritual war against that kingdom. And we saw that empire was made of smoke and mirrors.
Yeah,
that at the end of the day, if you have a higher authority that you can appeal to, you're immortal until the Father says otherwise. And they understand that. And ultimately they'll get to a place where they'll stop. They might still try to harass you or character assassinate you, but they change tactics and they won't directly try to assault people after a certain extent. Or for me, my approach and tactic was to divulge the secrets, to not keep these lists of things that I had done in the darkness where they could be used against me, but rather to bring them to the light and allow them to bear witness of, hey, this is what I was doing. This is what I was a part of. This is what this family is all about. If I'm killed off, let the blood of my body be the fertilizer for people's restoration and redemption, rather than for an agenda of deceit to continue to carry on. So those were some of the tactics that I pursued. Was radical honesty, was a willingness to make a covenant to my Creator and put my life in his hands and trust that he could give me life or he could give me death. But I would rather be in his kingdom, and I would rather die for the convictions that I have rather than the cowardice that once ruled my heart.
And you can't cross-examine honesty. I can always remember being in court, and there was a young girl that had been raped as a child, and she had the strength to bring it forward and report it. And I took the case on, and we had a success in the legal system. And they get the option as a vulnerable person to be interviewed and cross-examined by video link. And she said no. She was 17 years old. This girl said, I want to go into court with you, John. I said, okay. And she stood in the witness box and she pointed and said, that man did this, this, and this to me. Very sexually explicit, They couldn't cross-examine her because it was the truth.
Oh.
It was so powerfully the truth. Where'd you go from there? If they even cross-examined her, it would just make their client look worse and worse and worse and worse. And that was it, the case. But evil never gives up. Even when it's beat, it doesn't give up. It's just so arrogant. Nathan, I want to ask you something, because I get a lot of people coming to me that have been so badly abused, you know, and they're broken. And I tell them the way is through God, through Jesus Christ. He is the Lord, he is the Savior, and he fights against the paedophiles. He protects the children. And they say to me, but where was he, John, when I was being abused? When, you know, and I have to say to them, it wasn't God that allowed that. God never allowed that. But they're not convinced, you know, and they are very traumatized. And like you say, they don't have the freedom. They're still bonded to that anger, to that hatred, to that unforgiveness. And you can see it in their face and in their eyes. And I just want them to have freedom. And I know where the freedom is, but I don't want to insult them, because I never lived through them experiences and they did. What would you suggest I say to these people when they say, where was God when this happened to me?
You know, John, I don't know that I can tell you what you should say to them. You know, I know what I can say to people that have been through that, you know, and
that's good enough. Yeah.
It's an understanding of what that feels like, that desperate desire for someone to save you. I mean, that's what his name is. Like Yeshua, you know, people say Jesus, but like his name was Yeshua, which is salvation. Like his name means Yah is salvation. That's who he was. And it says he lived a life that was bearing out the temptations, the trials, the sufferings that we have experienced. He felt in his flesh the suffering and the anguish and the torment, the dismantling of his body and his soul. He bore that. He experienced that, so he could come alongside us and co-labor with us for those that are processing the memories of these traumatic events, for those who are reliving them bodily, who are getting body memories of, like when I was having to deal with these memories, I was physically having the manifestations of stuff coming out of my body, like bruises and bloody marks coming out of my skin. Like my body was finally reconnecting with the mental and cognitive walls that were being broken down, and there was a rewiring back to reality of what I'd gone through. And it was the most agonizing experiences, horrifying brutality being played out again and again and again. And you get this frustration and this rage of where, if he's omnipotent, if he is all-knowing, if he is all-present, how was he not intervening? Why he not intervening? And you know what? That's a question that no man on this earth is qualified to answer. That is a question that not any of us has the right to say, what was he doing when this was taking place? Let me tell you, I can't answer what he was doing in the moment or why he didn't step in at that hour to save you, to make it stop. Because I've heard and talked to other people who had somebody step in and intervene and made it stop at those moments and in those hours, and they were freed from it or brought out of it. But then there's others of us who just had to keep enduring it for a lifetime. I was one of those. I didn't have my golden knight right in and save mine. I had perpetual abusers stepping into my life, perpetual manipulators coming in and getting their tendrils all over me and using me and exploiting me for my life. I had everything I loved stripped away from me. I lost everybody. I lost people that I loved dearly, brothers in arms in the military who were murdered because I talked to them about these things, or they'd like me to believe it was because I talked to them about these things. But you know what? I have confidence that he has chosen me to be alive today, that you didn't perish. I am still alive, and they have not been able to steal my life. And if you're alive today and you survived horrors, torture, anguish, manipulation, cognitive controlling, and becoming a slave to monsters, you still have a choice. You still have the gift of breath that's in your lungs and blood in your body, and you can contend. You can choose to resist the fears and the depravity of these individuals that they're trying to pour on you. And you know what? You get to choose. He will never force himself on you. Our Father will never force you in his kingdom. He will never manipulate you to do his will. He will never demand of you to be in his kingdom. He has one door and one gate into his kingdom. And he says, if you come to me, I'm the good shepherd.
I knock on the door.
Rest. I'm a shepherd today. I've got sheep out there in the field just on the other side of this camera. I know what it is when the sheep cry out and scream. I know their voices and I run to them and I destroy the predators. But let me tell you, there's other times when they cry out in the night and I am not there. And I do not run out and protect them because I'm not able to. And I don't think it's because the Father couldn't intervene on every one of our lives. But you know what? Sometimes the Father wanted to raise up men and women and children in our generations to be the shepherds who would raise up, who would defend the innocent, who would put a stop to it, who would contend eagerly against that wickedness. And you know what? They're trapped in these covens of cowardice that are institutions of men have created, pacified, neutered, castrated men who have no conviction, who lack any type of discernment, who do not understand authority, and who are getting their lunches eaten by a bunch of infantile children who are running and ruling over them.
Well, that's what we mentioned earlier. That's
exactly right.
Infants. And you know, let's not forget the book of Matthew, and it says about the millstone. You know, these people think they've got away. They've got away with nothing. Absolutely not. What we're seeing is a revival, especially something I'm involved in. You know, my life is nothing if it's not ironic. The people I'm associating now, most of them are ex-criminals, a lot of ex-military guys, and they've gone to God. And they've said, right, we want to put an end to this. And before, what they've tried to do, society has tried to do, the institution, whatever we call it, the evil, is turn Jesus into a wimp. Jesus was not a wimp. This was a tough guy. This is one hard man. And we are getting hard men coming together now in the name of God, in the name of Jesus Christ, and saying, we're not putting up with this. And we're going out there and we're doing what we can, you know, with the tools that we've got. And do you know what? We're succeeding. And there is this revival. And we will go out there. And let's not forget the old saying, in order for the triumph of evil, it makes for good men to do nothing. There's a lot of good men that shut their doors. They close their eyes. They don't want to hear it. It's just too uncomfortable. But you know what? We're not one of them. We're not one of them. And I spoke to John Ramirez last week. And there's a few more I'm going to speak to. I spoke to Thomas Dunn, you know, and you know, out there. And these are good guys. And Tom said, because we lost Russ Dizdar this year, you know, and one of our good warriors, Wilfred Wong's in prison. And he said, what do we do? I said, we've got a perfect gift here. We've got this internet, you know. We're all speaking the same language, the language of justice and healing. And let's use what we got. Let's combine together and let's not bow down to evil. Let's not give evil 1/4, you know. Let's not get nothing. We will fight them, fire with fire, you know. And you know what? We're on the winning side, as you well know. And we need to give a message to the survivors and the victims that are still being hurt, that those that are doing this, they are absolutely doomed. If the law won't do nothing, let us do something, you know, as much as we can, you know. And the main thing with healing, they need justice, you know, and that's the thing that's lacking. But it takes for people to take an interest in their society. Love your children. Don't break your family. If you break your family, it's the children that get hurt. And keep one of the things I want to ask you, Nathan, because you will have this hypersensitivity, you know, these warning signs, you know. I've got it to a degree because I worked a lot with sex offenders and how they operate, and I can see and some things aren't right, and I highlight it. I don't trust that person because this and this. What would you, words of advice, give to people? Because there are people that might want to go into a church or whatever, but we get horror stories all the time about priests abusing, ministers abusing, you know. What would you say would be for people to look out for when they want to pick a church to go to or whatever?
Like as in some of the signs to keep an eye out for?
Yeah.
You know, it's a duplicity is really paramount to how these things are able to prosper, how these groups are able to prosper within them. And like you said earlier, the dismantling of family units and the strategic destruction of the family unit through the raping of the women out of their the heartbeat of the household that they once had in our societies, and the covenant that bonded men and women together as husband and wives. There's been a systematic dismantling of that so that we could create a vulnerable class of children who are given over to the state to be their instructors, their educators. Like in our country, we have 15,000 hours of compulsory education where we're supposed to give our children over at 5 years old to total strangers to raise them and manipulate and meddle with their minds and their souls at this most fragile time of life. And similarly, this is something that people are just as susceptible to when they go into the churches. That idea and that ideology got brought over from a Hindu class system where educators in France and Prussia began to look at this class system that could guard and protect the upper echelons of the Hindu society, these divine rights to rule these peoples that are at the top of the pecking order, to this distinct class order with the untouchables and these other races, basically, of people that are devoted to squalor and for way. You know, that model of the education system was brought over here to the United States and also into England to kind of make people subjects of mental stupidity, that they could not think critically. They could not exercise their ability to connect the dots and come to logical conclusions, to be able to read and also understand complex thoughts and actions, and to be able to communicate it with others effectively. And so we created a society of people that are really easily to be manipulated, to be controlled, and to be pushed through propaganda, through the engineering of people's consent. And they did that predominantly through the pulpits. Like we have one of the first billionaires in the Americas, Andrew Carnegie, who was a staunch atheist, who donated an organ to every church in America as a way of basically giving a goal of reciprocity. Hey, I gave you that beautiful organ system.
Yeah, I want something back.
Start coming to your society, your churches, they're going to give you a big check. You should consider what they have to say, right? And this is what drove the churchianity of America into Unitarianism.
We saw this during the First World War, you know, and it's the same, that people think education system's been about for a long time. It hasn't. You're right. I think 1870 or something, it started really coming in. And, you know, and a few years later, before you had free thinking men, they got these young men, they took them out of the fields where they were working, and they made them run blindly into machine gun fire, which is what we saw in the First World War.
That's right.
Know, we saw battles like Gallipoli, where they literally ran with a bayonet into machine gun fire and were mowed down because the discipline was instilled from the school, through the rod where they beat them. And then when they got home, they got beat, and then they'd go to the Sunday school and to the church, and they'd get it again there. And it was nothing but browbeating. Boom, 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 boom. You're right. You're 100% bang on.
And that system got to the world's preeminence because in the 1870s, when Napoleon III lost to the Prussian Empire in these unbelievable defeats, the most powerful military on the earth that had been risen up after Napoleon's conquest of Europe for a big extent was smashed apart by the Prussians. And people are sitting there, these, planners at their drawing rooms, trying to understand, how did that happen? And they said it's because of their defeat by Napoleon, the Prussians went back to this class system of education, because they attributed the loss to Napoleon as the fact that they had free thinking soldiers that rather than blindly run into their death and follow orders like they were told, they were running away during the middle of the battle. And they were like, no, self-preservation is more paramount, is more empowering to me than it is to just do what you say. And so they re-engineered their society through the education system. And so France and England and the United States took notice of this, and they brought that over into our society. They utilized the pulpits in America in particular. They utilized the pulpits in the Anglican church system to infect society with this idea that we need to have compulsory education, universal education systems. And what they created was exactly the product that you just described. Men that were willing to do what they're told because they were told by an authority figure to do it. We have in the 1960s, a gentleman named Stanley Milgram did these experiments where he put people in a room with a man in a white lab coat.
Is this where they electrocuted them?
Yes, and he had another person on the other side of this wall who would answer this series of questions. And if he got it wrong, the participant is supposed to electrocute that man with increasing amounts of electricity and voltage if he gets it wrong. Well, as this experimenter is telling the participant to shock that man, they continue to electrocute this stranger over and over and over again, seemingly to such an extent that they're killing him and causing him to have a stroke and die. And they found that this experiment has been repeated all kinds of different societies, socioeconomic places. 65% of people were willing to murder a stranger because a white-robed priest told them to, because someone who looks like an authority figure told them to. And this came out of after seeing the things that the Nazis were able to implement and a lot of the agendas that took place with human experimentation and massive mind control. They were wondering how susceptible is the regular man to this. And they found out that this education system has produced about 65% of the masses are willing to do that.
Yeah. And it's borderline psychopathic. The situation I was in was that I found, so many children that had come from broken homes that were being sexually exploited. They were being pimped out, for a better term, from the age of 9 upwards and just traded. And there was so many of them that they didn't have one dedicated officer to deal with it. There was myself and another girl. And I ended up in a meeting with the commissioner for the Metropolitan Police. And I turned around and I said, I can go into a children's home, get a child, groom that child. I can then rape that child. I can get my friends to rape that child, and we can then go out and then we can trade that child for money, get that child then to get her friends involved. You've not got one officer to deal with it, not one. Yet if I was to lean over my fence and call my neighbor, and I said a derogatory racist term, which I won't repeat on there, I said, you would have me arrested, you would have me in court, you would have me evicted from my home and make me sign in a register by the end of the day. How is that a just system? And it was just blank faces. But when I said this racist term, someone took a sharp intake of breath. And I said, I've just been talking about abducting, raping and pimping children. There were blank faces. I said, and this is this wokeism that's coming in now, where our value system is just upside down, totally upside down. And it's always the children that get hurt. The target is always the children. People need to wake up and realize that they are coming for our kids, and we are doing nothing about this. And we are seeing it with the pornography, the transgenderism that's being forced on children. And it is just destroying them bit by bit by bit, taking away their morals and their freedom of thought. And we're allowing them to do it,
Indeed. And this is nothing new. If people will look at the historical scriptures and understand there is everything you want to know about how the world operates, everything you want to know about the kingdoms of this world versus the kingdoms of our creator is plainly written in the scriptures. We can pick up these scriptures and see how history has played out this way time and again. And the enemy has always targeted the children.
Yeah.
Herod
did, didn't he?
He persecuted the Israelites in Egypt by targeting them and their children, by causing them to commit infanticide themselves. When it wasn't enough to oppress them and work them to death, they went and started strategizing ways that we got to just get these people to kill their own children. Yeah. We have to get them to turn their children over to us. The enemy has always operated this way. Even after Yeshua is born and Herod, the king, the ruling elite at the time, when he hears that, he goes, what we got to do? Kill all the babies. And kill all of them. This is nothing new, because these are the same spiritual powers. And the way that we fight them is the same way that we see in the scriptures. There's nothing hidden for how we can contend against this warfare. And that's to be the mighty men of valor, the Gibor. As David had in his army, you hear about these mighty men who would rise up, like Phineas, who rose up from amidst the congregation when the Israelites were being taken captive by the doctrines of Balaam, who was the grand sorcerer of Egypt and of Pharaoh, who was conspiring with the kings of the earth for rooms full of gold. Like in Numbers chapters 22 through 25, you can see this. He was conspiring for all this gold and this influence and this power. And so the king of Moab tried to pay him to curse Israel. And he said, I can't curse anyone that Yahuwah has blessed. And he couldn't curse Israel until he found a way to come up with, if we seduce the men of Israel, with the daughters of Moab, and we convinced those young men there to get to begin to have sexual relations with them and to bow down and eat food sacrificed to the idols, the Father will curse Israel and he will judge them for us. So that's that same system that has been played out over us. To answer your question, the unanswerable question of where was Jesus, where's Yeshua during these abuses? You know what? He has set before us instructions that we are to walk in to get life. He says, if you follow me and you walk in my ways, I'll give you life. I'll protect you. I'll provide food for you. I'll provide clothing for you. I will lead you. You will be the leaders of the nations and not the heel. You will be the conquerors of kingdoms and not the slaves. He says, I will free you from diseases, from despair, from debt. If you come and be with me, if you be in a relationship with me. But if you choose to forsake me, if you choose to reject me, you're going to be subject to these people and they're going to do this to you. And if you read Deuteronomy 28, he tells you this is the offerings for blessings for walking with me.
It's about witchcraft as well, isn't it? Yeah, they're gone about witchcraft, don't they, within that book?
That's right. And so they made evil good. They made children who are now the adults, who are now the grandparents. They've raised up a systematic indoctrination campaign to turn people away from righteousness, from truth.
I mean, I saw on British TV the other day, the adverts. I don't watch television per se, but I was on this occasion. And there was an advert coming up and it was for a monthly magazine. And it's about tarot cards, teach yourself tarot. And if we look at in Toys R Us in America, they were doing Ouija boards for girls for a Christmas present. And it was pink. It was deliberately designed for young girls. And you think, how is this allowed? But it's because people have turned their back. They've turned their back on God. They don't want to know because it doesn't serve them to go to God. And we are going into an atheistic world where they think there is all many rivers, only one sea. And there is this ignorance. But it says in the book of Hosea, doesn't it, that my people perish through lack of knowledge and lack of wisdom. And this is what we're seeing. It's not trendy to be with God. But what we're seeing and what I'm proud to be part of are what we call real men getting together and just saying, no, we're not having this. There is a way forward. There is a way to stop this. And if the system doing it, we're going to do this, but we're going to do this in the name of God. And there is a good way of doing it, a righteous indignation way of doing this, you know. And hopefully, you know, we'll see some fruits very, very soon. Already we are, but you know, I stepped away from a lot of the work I was doing last year, and now I've come back. I've come back with vigor. You know, you're the second main podcaster. I was blessed to have John Ramirez with his testimony. My good friend James put me in touch with yourself and said, you've got to check out Nathan and his work. And Nathan, I'm going to have to sort of call it short because I've got 90 minutes on this one. And it's been absolute pleasure. And man, you really are a preacher. You know, I could listen to you for another hour and the comments coming up exactly the same. So many people agreeing with what you're saying now.
Real quick to just say, Tom Dunn, if you read chapter 5 of my book, it's available free on my website. I also have the audiobook on my YouTube channel playlist so you can listen to it. But it's called Deliverance in Dallas. And that's where I met Russ Dizdar and Tom Dunn. And those two men were instrumental to bringing me out of this bondage and showing me men of conviction that were willing to stand and contend against this darkness and free people from that internal turmoil and despair. So be bold and courageous always, John, and continue to live dangerously, and the Father will be with you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And you know what? There's not much I can do about it. I'm on my journey and I'm a willing participant, but please plug your book. It's called Snatched from the Flames. It's on Amazon. Am I right?
Yeah. And you can go to YouTube, Nathan Reynolds, to see all of our videos and a lot of the ministry work that we're now doing, which is trying to empower people with a way of living that's set apart from the systems of the world, with farming and with traveling and with teaching people how to live an authentic lives with our creators and with his people.
Look, God bless you and God bless your family and what you're doing. Please stay in touch. And it's been an absolute privilege. And thank you so much. And I speak out to my audience. Please, can you come forward and go on Amazon and buy Nathan's book and put some pennies in his pocket so we can carry on doing the great work he's doing. God bless you, Nathan. Thank you so much. And hopefully speak to you soon. Have to get my man here now to log me off and to end. But thank you. Have a blessed day.